my sleeves and getting ready in front of this beautiful Christmas tree to share with you my favorite reads of 2023. These are going to be shared in no particular order, except that the very last book I share will be my favorite read of the year. It was really hard to pick my favorite read of the year, but I'm pleased. I'm pleased with what I settled on. Again, no particular order, and let's just dive in. There's quite a lot of them. It was a great reading year. So I did a reread of Christie. I got this from the library actually, and then loved it so much that I knew I was going to want to reread it again in the future, and picked up a Better World Books copy of it. I haven't actually read this one. When I ordered it, I ordered a different copy, but sometimes when you order things from Better World Books, you get what you get and you don't pitch a fit. So I have the Kelly Martin cover from the TV show. If you never watched this TV show, it is available on YouTube, and I think that's the only place it's available these days. And it is pretty delightful, but the book is so much better. This was definitely a favorite read of the year. I was completely immersed in this. It was the only thing I read. I didn't want to read anything else. I didn't want it to end, and I didn't want to slow down. So definitely favorite book of the year. Totally surprised by this one. I listened to this from my library on a whim. I actually didn't think that I would love it. Lots of times I will see things come up on the Libby app that have these cute covers, and I start listening and I'm like, no, and I DNF. Well, this one, I gave it a try because of its cute cover. Absolutely fell in love with this book. This is a romance series. It is about a family without a mother and father in Montana or Wyoming, and there are a lot of adult brothers and a teen younger sister. And the younger sister is trying to take care of her entire family, gets tired of it, learns about mail order brides, and puts an ad in a nationwide paper for a wife for her older brother. And it's pretty funny, and it's really well done, and I enjoyed it quite a lot. I reacquainted myself with George MacDonald during October this year and absolutely fell in love with The Maine's Bequest. Could not stop reading it. Could not remember why I stopped reading George MacDonald. I used to read him all the time when I was in college. I think on BookTube, he is better known, if known at all, for his fantasies, like The Princess and Curdie, but he has a whole lot more of these Christian romance novels, Christian Victorian romance novels, than he has fantasy stuff. So I highly recommend getting your hands on some of these. You can find them rarely without Michael Phillips as an editor, but the Michael Phillips edited versions are delightful. They're delightful. So I had that on my shelf for a long time, picked it up to read for Victober, and went, why did I ever stop reading this man? So this one, I got lost in this one. It is the silliest of stories, and the writing was perfect, the timing was perfect, and I enjoyed every moment of reading this book. This is Reasonable Adults by Robin Leffler. This is Robin Leffler's debut novel, and it is nothing deep, friends. It's nothing deep. I actually tabbed it. It's nothing deep, and yet it is so wonderful. It's just this kind of rom-com, definitely heavy on the com, about a woman who finds herself looking for like a perfect job after she loses her job, goes to work at this adult camp in Ontario somewhere where it's really freezing cold, and it's for creatives, wealthy creatives, and it's a weird situation when she gets there. It's almost cult-like. Something's not right. Things are weird, and she continues to stay through a series of events. And of course, there's a little romance, and there's some friendship, and there's a lot of finding herself, and there's a hilarious reveal of what's going on. It was wonderful. I really loved that. Right after I read that one, I read another favorite book of the year. I read Meet Me in Another Life. This one is really hard to say anything about because it is very much your experience with it is very much dependent on you not knowing what's going on and letting that unfold for you. Basic premise is that there are two people that keep being reincarnated into each other's lives, playing different roles, but always the same person. And they recognize each other after a while. Those lives start to overlap for them, like the grudges, the love, the hate, all the things that they carry from previous lives start to overlap for them. And this is their story, and it is also a greater story. So that's all I can say. This is a heartbreaking book, though. I bawled my eyes out at the end, and I loved it. I loved it. I'm not a sucker for those books that... I don't like it when a book is purposefully, like, obviously manipulating your emotion. This one just pulled out of me an empathetic response that was very strong, and I will cry for joy, or I will cry at death or something like that in a book, but this was, I was feeling what this character was feeling. So very well written, really beautiful book. I think it does not get the attention it deserves. Favorite book of the year, one of my favorite books of the year. I reacquainted myself with this one around the same time I reacquainted myself with Christie. This was a book that I read as a high schooler back when I was pretty much predominantly reading Victorian classics and Christian romance. Those were the things I was reading. This was one of my favorite books, but I had only ever read it once. And for years and years and years, for decades, I had considered it one of my favorite books. And so I got my hands on a copy of it with the awful cover. It's so terrible. Reread it a little trepidatiously because I was like, am I gonna still love this book? Do I have to like take it off of its pedestal in my life? And I did still love this book. This is Lori Wick's Sophies Heart. It has a new cover now, but I wanted, Lola's playing with a stuffed turkey. But I wanted my original experience. So I purposefully sought out a copy that had the 1990s cover, and that's a little locket sitting on a journal. Has nothing at all to do with the contents of the book. The Sophies Heart is a Christian romance. It does get a little preachy. It's okay. There is a character who's really like, women shouldn't wear pants. It's okay. What you really fall in love with in this book is the character of Sophie, and I did then, and I do now, wish for more for Sophie. I feel like she settles for something that doesn't fit her character. However, the character of Sophie herself is so wonderful, and this is the story of an immigrant woman who is highly educated. She's worked for the Russian government as a translator. She knows many, many languages, and she has been like a diplomat, and she comes to the United States and she ends up having to be a waitress and then a nanny because none of her education or experience matters in the United States, because that's how we roll. And she keeps her like intelligence and experiences close to her heart as she humbly fills these roles. But of course, all of that is part of her, and it comes out eventually. She's a formidable character who is fun and funny and strong and sure of herself and in a weird position for weird reasons. It's delightful. I really, really, really am glad that I reread that and that it's still a favorite read. This one almost was my favorite book of the year. My favorite book of the year is completely different from it, but this was almost it. This is Alison Goodman's The Benevolent Society of Ill-Mannered Ladies. I listened to this and loved it so much that I purchased a copy of it for myself because I know that I'm going to want this whole series. This will be an auto-buy series for me. It is the first, I love that spine too. It is the first in a series of books. The series is I don't know what the series is. A novel of mystery and adventure. It's about two sisters in the Regency period who form the Benevolent Society of Ill-Mannered Ladies. And it takes you through 3 different crusades that they're part of, 3 different jobs per se, which are based on real life, awful occurrences in Regency life in London. And these two sisters are kind of like mirror opposites. They are very much alike, but in very distinct ways, they are incredibly different. One is an atheist, feminist, proto-feminist, but atheist, proto-feminist, wild woman who'll take millions of risks and isn't afraid to tell lies and is totally and completely, I mean, she's not a liar, but she'll fib and is attracted to a highwayman. And the other is really like straight-laced, religious, spiritual, sick, and just wonderful. So the two of them together really complement each other. They keep each other accountable. They have really deep conversations in this book about very big topics, and yet it's also still lighthearted and incredibly historically accurate. There is a story of them trying to help a woman escape from her husband who is slowly starving her to death because it's better than getting a divorce. There's two other cases that are based on real historical happenings that I won't tell you about because that would ruin it for you. But the first case is trying to help this woman. Really, really great book. Loved it. Cannot wait. Literally cannot wait. Check frequently to see if the second book has been announced. This book is representative of my experience rereading an entire series, and that is my time this year with the Austen family. Again, I love these books so much. If you have not read the series, there are 5 of them in the series. There's this one, which was written in the 1950s, and the last one was written in the 1990s, and it takes the family through not that much time. The kids don't grow up. The kids grow up like maybe 2 or 3 years over the course of the time that it takes Madeleine L'Engle to write this series. But the focus and the voice and the views of the families reflect the time periods in which they're written. Super fascinating on so many levels, but also just incredibly enjoyable. Loved every moment with this family. I have 2 by this author. So you know what? I'm going to set this one aside because when I get to the other one in the stack, I'll show those to you at the same time. I thought, is this being silly to put these books on here as favorite reads? But they truly are favorite reads. Your favorite reads don't have to be like life-altering, life-shattering books. It could just be that you had just a really great moment with that book and it will stick with you. And that is what this was for me. I read this in one day. I so enjoyed it. I knew I loved this author, but I had never read this book before. And that is Silence for the Dead by Simone St. James. This is the story of a woman pretending to be a nurse, and she shows up at an asylum for World War I veterans, and it's haunted, and she has to help some living people and some dead people deal with their stuff. She doesn't know what she's signing up for. She's got to deal with her own stuff too. She's got secrets. It's just such a great read. It's such a great read. I will remember my experience with that book for quite some time. This one shocked the pants off of me. Okay, not literally, my pants stayed on, but this one shocked me quite a lot because I was a professed disliker of this author. I had read an entire series minus the final book by this author and thought for sure this was not an author for me. But when Victober rolled around and I was feeling the need for something substantial and slow, I thought of rereading a Dickens, but then I was like, not ready to reread a Dickens. I thought I was going to do Katie from Books and Things, her like 2 years of reading Dickens together, but I had just finished reading all of Dickens in a year and a half, a couple of years ago, and I'm just not ready. I'm just not ready yet. So I was like, what are my alternatives? I could go Middlemarch, but I've already read Middlemarch and I'm not ready to reread that again. I could go Wives and Daughters, but for some reason I wasn't feeling a Gaskell. I wanted the author I don't like. So I did a lot of research to try and pick a standalone by this author that I thought I might enjoy. And I loved it. It's on my favorites of the year stack. This is Orly Farm by Anthony Trollope. Is he pretentious? Yes. Is he repetitive? Yes. Is he slow? Yes. But the premise of this book is hilarious. There are scenes in this book that had me laughing out loud. There was no, like, it goes between different families and different characters as far as chapter by chapter. There was no family or character where I was like, oh, them again. I loved my whole experience with this book. It took me an entire month to read. I read 3 to 5 chapters a night, depending on how I felt. And every night for a month and got through it that way. Consistency paid off, and I genuinely adored this book. Some of these characters are going to stay with me forever. Some of the images, especially the wife that is so very stingy. There's a character in here who's so stingy with food. And I was just, there's so many fascinating insights into Victorian culture and characters. Like, she's worthy of Mrs. Havisham fame, this character that is so stingy with food. Like, she's worthy of that kind of veneration, but she doesn't get it because I think most people just can't get through all the trollop. All the trollop. There's so much trollop in this trollop. But I really loved my time with this book, and surprise, surprise, it ended up on my favorite books of the year. Okay, I tried to read this whole series, and the second book stumped me because it just isn't as good as the first book. The first book was magical. It was epic in the way that I loved it. So I didn't even finish the second book, really. I skimmed to the end in the hopes that I could pick up the third book and I might love it, but then I haven't picked up the third book at all. I will. However, this first book in the series, it is a thing of beauty. It is a thing of beauty. And that is Wildwood by Colin Malloy and illustrated by Carson Ellis. This book is what children's books should be. And I'm so sad that the second book let me down so much. But this book about a little girl who's babysitting her brother and he gets stolen by crows. So she and this tag-along who becomes a good friend end up going into the wild wood that's near St. John's outside of Portland and face trials and tribulations and evilness of the evil queen and all of the manipulation and the politics of another land and the talking animals and all the fun things. It is so good. It's so good. Let's just take a moment. Let's just take a moment of quiet reflection on how good this book is. If you've never read it, put it on your list. Highly recommend the audio as well. The first book is narrated by a woman. I don't know her name. I would have to look it up. She does such a good job. And also, though, I read over half of this without the audio, and it stands alone as well. This would be an amazing read aloud. This is an amazing book for adults. There are lessons in here for adults. This is a great book for middle grades. This would be a great book for a teen if you could get them to get out of their own head and pick it up. It is so good. Highly recommend. I read and loved another Victober book. This is a great year, a great reading year. I read and loved this tiny little volume called The Prisoner of Zinda. This one is about a British guy whose sister-in-law is teasing him that he does nothing and she wants him to get a job. So he says, okay, I will go abroad and I'll write a book about it and I'll publish. First of all, that is a job in Victorian England, that you could just do that. Like, I know there are travel writers today, but like, it's a hard gig to get paid for, that he could be like, oh, I'll set my fortune by traveling and writing a book about it. Like, those were the days, friends. But I know there's a lot of other things that are not those are the days about that time period, but that would be amazing to just be able to go, you know what? Forget actual work. I'm going to travel and write about it and people will pay me. Anyway, that's his plan, but he doesn't get very far because he happens to look like a man who's about to be crowned king of a small little place called Zinda that doesn't really exist, but that exists in this world. And that king needs to be crowned because he's got an evil brother who will steal his crown, except he's not able to be crowned, so this guy has to stand in his place. And mayhem and espionage and wonderful things ensue. It's very short, it's very fast-paced, and it's very, very fun. I was craving an adventure novel, and it was perfect. Loved it. I read the first and second book in this series by an author that I have come to really love this year. And I don't have the first book in the series on this stack. It was just okay for me, but the second book, The Belle of Belgrave Square by Mimi Matthews, was a phenomenal read for me. And I think that is just, I think the writing's great, but I also think, like, she's just a great storyteller, Mimi Matthews. But I also think that the contents, like, there is a serious Bronte sort of nod in this book. It's kind of gothic, and it's definitely gothic. There is a woman who gets lost too frequently in books. She sees the world through the lens of these gothic books that she loves so much, and she's in kind of a rough place with her family. She needs to be rescued, but she orchestrates her own rescue, and that rescue means that she's entering into a marriage of convenience with a very mysterious and unknown man who happens to have rumors about him that he murdered his entire family, or his wife or something. I don't remember. He's a murderer. And he has a dark and stormy manor house that they go to that is inhabited by some very strange children. And it's just wonderful. It's a wonderful book. All these little things that I love from Gothic Victorian novels are compiled here in this kind of Northanger Abbey-esque take on that whole situation. And it was beautiful. Perfect for me. Loved it. I read and loved this book by an author who has a series of books that I really love that I thought was a duology, but now I realize there's going to be a third one, so I'm excited about that. This is the first in a second series by this author. I think they have many books, but series that I'm aware of. And that is Jessie Q. Sutanto's Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. I say it's going to be a series because I hope it's going to be a series. The antics that Vera Wong gets up to in her little tea shop, trying to solve this mystery of the dead body that ends up there, the way that community is built, the way a found family is created. It's all just done so hilariously and heartwarmingly well. I really, really loved this, and I will read any of these kind of cute and cozy Jessie Q. Sutanto books. I know she's got some YA stuff. I've tried it. Don't like it. I know she's got something maybe a little bit more thriller-esque. Not interested. Give me more aunties. Give me more Vera Wong. I'm here for it. This is a nonfiction I read very early on in the year and have thought about quite a lot and plan on revisiting again this January. That is Rest is Resistance, a manifesto by Tricia Hershey. And this goes into the political reasons we are overworked and how choosing not to buy into that, this hustle economy, this gig economy, and the expectations that if you don't look harried and exhausted, you aren't doing enough, compiled with a bunch of other stuff as well. Just choosing not to participate in that is a form of political resistance. And I bought into it wholeheartedly. I fully embrace all the things that she's talking about. And I plan to reread it again, but this was definitely a favorite read of the year. I've thought about bits and pieces of it quite a lot throughout the year. Here we are. Here's that second. I think this is the only author that has 2 books on my favorite reads of the year stack. I read other books by this author this year as well that just were not favorites, but these 2 will be favorites for quite some time. First of all, and they're quite different from each other. First of all, and I read them on my Kindle, but wanted physical copies, so I purchased these for myself this year. Thorny Hold by Mary Stewart. I love this copy that I got so much. I love it. This one, I was reading it on my Kindle, and I was like, what is going on here? I couldn't tell if this was going to be some kind of fantasy or if it was going to have like logical explanation. But there's a girl who seems to have powers, who has an aunt who seems to be a witch, but maybe it's all easily explained away. And it just reads so gloriously easily. It was like satin. I don't know. It was just like smooth. It was a smooth read. And the whole time I had no idea what was actually going to happen. And the end made me laugh out loud. And I loved every second with this book. And I'm not telling you much about it because I think you should just pick it up, read it, and have no idea what's going on as well. It will reveal all to you. It's such a delight. It's such a delight. Back. I love this copy. I love this copy. And on the inside, it says, 1988, happy birthday, mommy. Love from all of us. Okay, I love used books. So the other book, the other Mary Stewart that ended up on my favorite reads is 9 Coaches Waiting. This one, again, like the Mimi Matthews that I love so much this year, has nods to Jane Eyre. It's very gothic. It's very aware of its nods to Jane Eyre. This one goes off the rails wild, though, in the end with like chases and hiding and just all sorts of like, you really don't know if someone's going to be killed or not, and it's just so wonderful. There are also nods to Rebecca in this one, and I know Rebecca has nods to Jane Eyre as well, but like they have slightly different feels. And so, yeah, just really, really delightful, fun, fast-paced thriller read. This one I didn't know was going to be a favorite. I listened to it, and I didn't think that I was going to make it a favorite. I did give it 5 stars, but I didn't think I was going to make it a favorite. I knew I enjoyed it. I was surprised I enjoyed it, much like The Trollop. I didn't think I'd ever read another book by this author again. I disliked the first one I read by this author so much. So much, in fact, that I made an entire video series about it. Not series, an entire video about how much I disliked the book. And I don't do that. I don't do that. I tend to say most of the time, this was not a book for me. But this book, I really, really disliked, and so many people liked it so much that I felt like I needed to give something counterbalance to that. And I ended up listening to this on the Libby app because the cover was pretty. Cover artists, you do real work. You do a real service for us readers. And then I realized I picked up a copy for myself months after I'd read it because I realized it actually hadn't left me. It actually had stayed with me in quite a pleasant way. And that is Linda Holmes's Flying Solo. I disliked a great deal Evie Drake Starts Over. I really disliked that book for many, many valid reasons. I really loved this one. This one people don't seem to like, and I just thought it was the bee's knees. I really, really enjoyed this book. It is about an older woman, and there's a little mystery with some ducks and her aunt, and there's a little romance, and there's a lot of awkwardness, and I thought this was really, really, really delightful, and I highly recommend this one, and skip Evie Drake, because this was one of the first books, if not the first book I read for the year. So actually it was the first book I read for the year, and it started me out well. I got this as a Christmas gift last year, and yeah, it was my first book of the year, and I loved it. I loved the concept of it so much. This is The Big Bang Theory, the definitive inside story of the epic hit series by Jessica Radloff. What she did was, over the course of several years, she did a bunch of interviews, collected a bunch of scripts and notes and emails and correspondences with everybody who has any kind of relationship with the show, actors, mothers, stagehands, people who were almost cast but weren't, directors, producers, people from other shows looking in, like anybody you could possibly think of. She interviewed them separate from each other. All of these interviews were separate. And she took all of those interviews and transcribed them into an order which made it feel like a conversation between the people. And it is a thing of beauty. It is like a life's work. And it is the key to all mythologies centering around the Big Bang Theory TV show. And I loved every second of it. And I think that it's just so well done, but also really insightful and really interesting. If you like the show, there's a lot to learn about the show here and about the actors and the actresses. It's not gossipy in any way. They're very much a community of friends, and they spill some dirt on each other, but like in a friendly way. They are very protective of each other as well. And so it was very feel good. It was very honest, but also very feel good from start to finish. So I really, really loved my time with this. I don't know that it's a recommended to everyone sort of book, but I really loved it. It was a great start to the year, set the tone for my year of reading in such a positive fashion. I've had this on my shelf for such a long time, and I finally picked it up right around the time that I also read Christy and Sophies Heart, and I loved it. I should have known I would love it. I love this author's writing. Should have known I would love it. That's Elizabeth Acevedo's With the Fire on High. A, this is just a gorgeous book, but also B, the inside is gorgeous too. This is the story of a high school senior who also happens to be a single mom, and she's trying to make practical decisions for her life, but she's got a dream and a real passion for cooking and seasoning things. And there happens to be the opportunity to take a cooking class that will lead to a trip to Spain to study cooking. And she thinks that it's not in the cards for her. And then she gets the opportunity to do it. And through a series of both positive and negative events in her life. And it's just basically her story, but it's really about following your dreams and valuing yourself, and taking up responsibility for yourself as well as people who are relying on you. And this was just so beautifully, beautifully done. It's very realistic, very like solidly in reality, but also incredibly hopeful. And I really, really loved it. This was a more recent read, but I am still going to put it on my favorite reads of the year because I do think it was a favorite read of the year. This is a YA book. So many surprising books on my favorite reads of the year this year because I have sworn off YA really. Like, I will pick them up here and there, but I very rarely love them, and I loved this. This is Witch Haven by Sasha Payton Smith. I have the second one, The Witch Hunt, to read in January, and I'm very, very excited about that. I adored this book. This is about a young woman who is not necessarily orphaned, but she's, for all intents and purposes, she's all alone. Her brother has recently been murdered. It's turn of the century New York. Her mom is in an asylum for the insane, and she is working sewing in a upscale seamstress shop with a bunch of other girls, and they all live there together. The shop is run by a woman, but owned by a kind of yucky man, and one evening he corners her when she's all alone in the workshop, and without really knowing how it happens, he ends up dead by her scissors. As she's trying to figure out what to do about the situation, because she doesn't even know how to explain the situation, because although she was there and lived through it, she doesn't know what happened. Two women show up and whisk her away, saying that she has tuberculosis and she has to go into an asylum. She knows she doesn't have tuberculosis, but they say she does, and this gets her out of that very tricky situation. Turns out she is not suffering from tuberculosis. In fact, she is a witch, and she's been sent to, or being sent to, a school for witchcraft, which may be more like a prison than a school. She's trying to solve the murder of her brother. She's trying to learn about herself. She's trying to figure out a lot of things. And there is a cute Irish guy involved. It's just really well written. It's really an enticing plot. It moves at an appropriate pacing, and the writing is really good. This one is one that I read at the beginning of the year as well. Millions of tabs. I feel like I want the whole world to read this book. That is The Teachers by Alexandra Robbins. I want the whole world to read this book, but do I think that it is I highly recommend this for everybody kind of book? No, I really don't. I think that I love this book so much and I tabbed so much because it's so truthful and so relatable to me as a teacher, but I don't know that the rest of the world would read this and realize how honest it is. Now, I did this little thing this year where I joined Book of the Month. I've always kind of been a Book of the Month hater. I don't want somebody telling me what the best books are to read. I know myself, and I know myself as a reader, and I don't necessarily think that an organization can cater to my reading taste. Yes, I am prideful about this. So I've always been a little bit anti-Book of the Month for myself. I got Book of the Month for my sister for her birthday and watched her have a great experience and felt a little FOMO. And so I joined in December and I got Babbel and I never looked back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books. I'm 6 books away from showing you my favorite book of the year. Those 6 books are all Book of the Month books. I love Book of the Month. And what I really love about Book of the Month is that a lot of the books that are on this list and most of the books that I picked from Book of the Month were like challenge books for me. They were outside of my comfort zone. They were books that I totally would have overlooked or never even thought of picking up. That is not true for all of the books that you're about to see. Some of them I got from Book of the Month because I'd received ARCs and already knew that I loved them. And Book of the Month was the least expensive way to get a copy of those books for myself. And I wanted to own them in a physical form. So there's that positive outcome of Book of the Month as well. The first one would be Catherine Center's Hello Stranger. This was the first one that I read by her, and I loved this one. This is about a portrait artist who suffers a brain injury that means that her brain can no longer comprehend faces. It's a type of face blindness, and it may go away, like her brain may heal, or it may stay forever. And she also she's on a time crunch because she has to draw a portrait for a competition that she's entered that could change her life. And so that she entered before she had the injury. And there's some hilarity that is very obvious to the reader. In fact, I mean, I knew exactly what was going on from the very beginning, but that just made it funnier to me. This book had me laughing out loud. It had me feeling for the character. It was very heartwarming, and I just felt it was like an American Sophie Kinsella. And if you know me at all, you know I love Sophie Kinsella. Yeah, I just really, really, really adored this book. This one, I really, really loved. I got this as an ARC. I was very excited. I've read other books by this author before, and some have been hits and some have been misses for me. This was an actual, like, knock it out of the park, so good of a read. This is Alice Hoffman's The Invisible Hour. I read this as an ARC, but then it was available as an add-on through Book of the Month, and so I picked it up because, again, it was the cheapest way to get my hands on a copy of this book without having to wait for a million years. And I wanted to reread it in physical form. This is a book that seems to be just a straight up historical fiction about an unwed mother who runs away. She has an argument with her family and she runs away with her child to join a commune. And this commune is a cult. So she gets fully immersed in this, and she's gorgeous and beautiful, and she ends up becoming the partner of the leader of the cult. I'm trying to think if this is a spoiler or not. I don't think it is a spoiler. When she dies, leaving her daughter in that cult, some things start to happen that aren't necessarily straight up historical fiction, but are more in the realm of magical realism, until we end the story in a full-on time slip situation, and it's a glorious time slip situation. You've got Nathaniel Hawthorne in here. You've got really, really strong characterization in here. You've got beautiful writing and setting in here. And you fall, what's her name? You fall so in love with this character, Mia. I think about this book a lot. There's a lot of depth here that I can't go into. It's a metaphor that I can't go into because it'll ruin some of the book for you. But you would not be disappointed if you read this book on any level. It is equally entertaining and thought-provoking. Now, the next set of books, 1, 2, 3, 4, are all books that I got from Book of the Month, and I was taking a risk, and the risk paid off. So I got The Last Word by Taylor Adams. I know some people are like, when does it end? It ends like 17 times, and they're not wrong. I loved that, though. I loved it. I read this in one day. I couldn't stop reading it. I had to know what would happen. I loved every second of this wild, wild ride, and it's like a super great thriller, and it is definitely one of my favorites of the year. It's about a woman who is in an Airbnb, and she is there for the long term, and she writes a bad review, and the author of that bad review becomes threatening, and then crazy things start to happen in her house. And the only person she has any contact with is a neighbor, and they only communicate through telescopes and whiteboards through their window across a vast distance. Fun. It was a really fun book, really fun read, and I actually really loved the way that it never quite ended like you thought it was going to end, and there was another kind of ending, and there was another kind of ending, and the final ending is so emotional. I hadn't read anything by this author before, and this was a really big stretch for me because it was both a Western and a horror. I tabbed this book a lot for me. That's Victor Laval's Lone Women. I think about this one so much as well. This is a horror. If you are a little bit squeamish or a little bit on the fence, don't pick this one up. This is a horror. It is about a woman who, at the beginning of the book, you see her loading an extremely heavy trunk into a wagon to be taken to board a ship in San Francisco. And from there, she's going to purchase some land and settle in, I think, Montana, maybe Wyoming. Montana. But at the very, very beginning, this is not a spoiler, this is first pages, while all of this information is being relayed to you, she's also burning her house down with her dead parents inside it. And there's something in the trunk, and we don't know what's in the trunk, but she's very protective of the trunk. And the story unfolds from there. This is a story about lone women trying to make it in the world with all the things they carry in their trunks. And it is a horror story. And I loved it. I loved every second of it, including like the gory details. It scared me, and it's also inspiring and emotional and funny and terrifying. Loved this book. Loved it. I have read things by this author before, and knew that I enjoyed her writing, but so her books are kind of a hit or miss for me. She's got one called Sister of My Heart, which was one of the very first books I read about India while living in India by an Indian author. And so she's always had like a soft spot in my heart. So this was not a huge stretch for me. I chose it because of the author and my soft spot for the author and for my love for India. This is about three sisters, and it represents three different experiences within the same family of the partition. It has some really, really gut-wrenching moments. This book is not for the faint of heart. It's very short, but it is lyrical and fast-paced, but takes its time. I don't know how she accomplished that, but she did. You fall in love, like with all of her writing, you fall in love with the main characters, and it's really focused on the relationships between those main characters. But the characters represent different aspects and communities in India during the partition. And it's not the most original idea, but the way that she does it is totally unique. And I loved this book, and I would highly recommend it. And if you haven't read a lot of books on the partition, this is a great place to start. And if you don't know what the partition is, it's a great place to start. This one, I absolutely was floored by how much I loved it. So I tend to steer clear of books that I know are going to make me cry. And like I've already said in this video, I really don't appreciate books that aim to manipulate my emotion in a tearful way. If your goal as a book is to be a comedy and to make me laugh, I'm all for it. But if your goal is to make me cry, that's your only purpose for existence, Frederick Bachman, I'm looking at you, then I am not here for it. I'm not here for it. And I'm not going to pick up your book, most likely. I don't mind if a book genuinely makes me cry, like the one that I've already mentioned earlier, because of the writing and the circumstance and how much I've grown attached to the characters. Like, that's genuine, and I'm all there for that. That's great. You put in the hard work. You made me put in the hard work, and I love it. I feel rewarded for that. But if you are taking cheap shots at my emotions, I don't like it. And I kind of thought this book had the potential to be a cheap shot at my emotion kind of book. It is The Collected Regrets of Clover by Mickey Bramer. It is about a woman who is a death doula. She helps people die. And it had the potential to do that. Did this book make me cry? Several times. Did I feel manipulated? Not at all. This book also has a character that I fell in love with, living a life that I felt sorry for, in a community of found family that's really adorable. And you learn her backstory, why she is the way she is, how she's ended up the place she's ended up. It's understandable that she would be so disconnected from life. She's a little bit of an Eleanor Oliphant character. She's disconnected from life through her own choice because of the events and the kinds of relationships she's had in the past. By relationships, I don't mean romantic relationships. I just mean with her parents, with her grandfather, with the people around her. She's kind of lived an entire life building walls. And so it makes sense that she is comfortable helping people die all the time. And here she learns to live. And it's really, 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 really beautifully done. And I loved every second of it. And I know a lot of people feel differently about this book, but for me, this was a real win. Loved it. Definitely a favorite of the year. Now, the moment you've been waiting for, my favorite read of the year. My favorite read of the year, which really surprised me again. There are so many authors on this list that I thought I wouldn't read from again, but ended up being on my favorite books of the year, and this one being my favorite book of 2022. Now, this author wrote a book that was turned into a movie that I absolutely love. It's a movie I rewatch frequently. It's kind of a comfort film for me, but they also wrote a book that I really, really will never go near. Didn't like the book that the movie I love is based on. Why did I pick this up? Why did I pick this up? I don't know. The synopsis and the cover art made me pick this up. And that's Booth by Karen Joy Fowler. And it is my favorite read of the year. This is a book about Shakespeare. It's a book about the Booth family. It's a book in which the assassination of Abraham Lincoln takes place, but it's not about Abraham Lincoln or the assassination. And it's not about John Wilkes Booth either, although he's a character in it. It's about his family. It's about the people around him. It's about the effect of his actions, even though the majority of this takes place long before that event will ever be connected with him. It's about the way that people respond to the people they love when the people they love do things that they don't understand. It's really a book about active shooters' families, terrorists' families. And it is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. I need to reread it. I'm making myself wait. I highly recommend this book to you and yours. It's very readable. It's very beautiful. If you love Shakespeare, there's so much in here. Yeah, favorite book of the year. Favorite book of the year. And with that, I will say, happy reading. Here comes 2024. You've got a lot to live up to, 2024. 2023 set a very, very high bar of amazing reads. And I don't know if 2024 can top it, but we will see. What were your favorite books of the year? Did you read any of these? A lot of them aren't from this year, so I wouldn't be surprised. A lot of them are backlist titles. But do you do book of the month? Have you thought about book of the month? Is there anything on here that you've read that you also loved? Is there anything on here that you entirely disagree with? You're like, book is so terrible, what are you doing? You know, I think I need to do a video on how I rate books and how I choose books. They're kind of like, I think in my understanding, in my take on book rating, there are the people who rate based entirely on the content of the book, the skill of the writer, and also maybe the political weaponization capability of the book. That seems to be a really top priority for a lot of people in their reading life. And that's one way to go, and there's nothing wrong with going that way. And then there's also people who rate books based on their experience in the moment with that book and their relationship to that book, regardless of the world's relationship to that book. And I think that I have learned about myself in my years on BookTube that I am that second kind of reader. I tried to be that first kind of reader because I think it's commendable. But I am not that reader. I read for the experience, my personal experience. I'm a selfish reader. And so for me, these are my best books of the year, even if they aren't the best books ever written. I mean, Sophies Heart, come on. You know that's not a great book, but it's a great book for me. So, what's your favorite book? What's your favorite book that you've read this year? You don't even have to know exactly why it was your favorite book. It just stuck with you. What are the books that speak to your heart? Let me know. In the meantime, let's go read.